Yeah, so welcome to another NoBeC talk. We will follow a very similar agenda than in our other talks. I will give a short welcome, then we will have our NoBeC early career researcher for this week, which is Eugenio Berrina from GATE Lyon. And then we will have the main NoBeC talk for today by Professor Silvia Sonderegger from the University of Nottingham. And then we will have 15 minutes questions, as always. Right, so as always, a short reminder that this is a series organized by our Center for Social Norms and Behavioral Dynamics at the University of Pennsylvania. We are a center that tries to enable organizations around the world to sustainably enact positive behavioral change. We do mainly consulting, research, and training. You have our website here, and you have a QR code that takes you to our Twitter account. So please follow us on Twitter. Every talk, I bring you a small update on what we are doing, a small description of some of our projects. In this occasion, I wanted to show you some of the most recent papers by our members. If you go to the link at the bottom of the page, which is on our main website, you look for the research tab, you will see all these new papers. As you can see, they include a wide variety of topics, and they also include the protocol for our intervention for improved toilet usage in Tamil Nadu, which is a topic that we've discussed here in previous occasions. So yeah. Right, so this is the remaining talks for the summer until September. For now, we will continue in October, but the list of speakers is still to be announced. So remember, please, in 2 weeks, we will have Max Winkler from Harvard University, and then every 3 weeks on August 5th and August 26th. And then on September 9th, we will finish this part of the talks. As I mentioned, in October, we will begin again. As always, you can see in our website or scanning the QR code, the full list of talks, the abstracts, the videos of past talks, and so on. If this is the first time that you're joining us, I just wanted to remind you a few ground rules. Please mute yourself during the talk. If you can, please keep your camera on to have a more interactive experience. If you want, also, please modify your username so that we know from which institution you're joining. For questions, please use the raise hand function at the end. And during the talk, you can ask any questions on the chat. We have a co-author here in the audience today, so which is Dr. Oigon Demand, and he will be answering your questions in the chat as we've done in previous occasions. This video is being transmitted on our Facebook page, and the recordings of all the sessions are always uploaded a few days after in our website. So with this, I'm going to play the video by our early career researcher this week, Dr. Eugenio Berrina. He's a postdoctoral researcher at GATE Lyon in France. He does research on experimental and behavioral economics, and the presentation is called Personal Norms and Not Only Social Norms Shape Economic Behavior. You have here a link to his website for more information, and you can also scan this QR code. So yeah, and Eugenio is here in the audience today, so he will be able to answer your questions in the chat as well. So let's go to the video. Right.
Hello, everyone. I'm very happy to be presenting today. I'm Eugenio Verrina, and I'm a postdoc at the GAT in Lyon. And today we'll talk about joint work with Sławomir Vasic on personal norms and not only social norms shape economic behavior. So our starting point for this project is the observation that social norms have been used to explain a very wide variety of behavior across many settings, from prosociality to costly punishment, wage negotiation.
Sorry about that.
Wait.
All right, sorry about that. It stopped.
To costly punishment, wage negotiations, all the way to political behavior. However, people may not only care about social norms, but they may also care about personal norms. So while both are prescriptions of appropriate behavior, hence moral and correct behavior, they're different because they come from different sources. So social norms capture prescriptions that come from society, while personal norms come from within an individual. So why is it interesting and important to look at social norms and personal norms? Well, because they can differ in many important contexts. So think of tax compliance, discrimination, climate change, and virtually any behavior that is governed by norms. So what can happen is that people may face two potentially competing normative principles, and both can determine behavior. So what we do in this study is we propose a simple utility framework in which we argue that people, in addition to social norms and monetary payoffs, also care about personal norms. And then we designed a two-part experiment to estimate this framework and investigate the relevance of personal norms across different economic games and settings. So before I go into the experimental design, let me very briefly talk about the social and personal norm-dependent utility framework that we propose in the paper. So what we say is very simply that the utility of an individual I from performing action AK is given by the monetary payoff attached to that action plus two symmetric components, a social norm component and a personal norm component. And what we're going to do is we're going to estimate the weights that people put on these different components. So our experimental design is rather straightforward. We have a two-part experiment, a first online session in which we elicit social norms and personal norms for 4 different games, and then a second session, which takes place in the lab. So subjects come to the lab approximately 4 weeks after the online session, and they play the 4 games. We have 2 between subject treatments, a private treatment and a social treatment, the aim of which is that of increasing the salience of social norms. So our first result is kind of a conditio sine qua non of our whole exercise. So what we want to know is what the relationship between personal and social norm looks like. So while we do find a considerable correlation between the two, we also find a substantial individual level heterogeneity. So a non-zero difference in approximately 50% of the actions across the games. So what you can see here are the 4 different games and each action within the games. And what we show is the difference between the personal and the social norm rating, which is 0 if it takes this yellowish color, and it's either negative or positive if it takes these red colors or these green and bluish colors. So having established this first result, we now want to look at kind of the main hypothesis of our study, namely whether personal norms are explanatory of economic behavior. So we estimate the weights that people put on the different components, and we find that the weight that people put on the personal norm component is always positive and highly significant for all 4 games, and also for our pooled data set. Now, the next step is that of looking at the effect of the social treatment. So we're mainly interested in the interaction between the treatment and the weight that people put on social norms. We find that this weight increases as we predicted for 2 out of 4 games, and also for the pooled data set. Interestingly, the weight that people put on personal norms remains unaltered. Now, the last step of our main analysis is that of looking at the added value of personal norms. So we want to know, and we want to compare a 2-norm model with a model with either only social norms or only personal norms in it. And what we find is that indeed personal norms increase the predictive fit of our models, and in fact that the 2 norms complement each other. We also have a whole series of robustness checks, which you can find in our paper. And the last bit of data that I want to show you comes from additional experiments in which we replicate our very first result for the 4 main games, and also extend this result to additional games and vignettes. And that's what you can see down here. Okay, so I'm already concluding. Personal norms are a strong predictor of economic behavior. They complement social norms in doing so, and are robust to exogenous manipulation. They are also distinct from social norms across a very wide array of economic contexts. And we think this builds robust evidence that people do not only care about social norms, but also personal norms. If you want to know more about the paper, you can scan this QR code, and you can also find me on Twitter. Thanks a lot.
Great. Thank you so much, Eugenio, for your presentation. That was very interesting. So as mentioned, Eugenio is happy to answer any questions you have on the chat. And then here is his information again, the QR code to his website and the link. So thank you so much. Right, just a last reminder before we go to the main talk for today, that in 2 weeks we will have Dr. Max Winkler from the Department of Human Evolutionary Biology at Harvard University, speaking about whether disasters affect adherence to social norms. As you already know, same time, same link, everything. If you already registered, you get reminders, and you can join using the same link. Having said that, I'm going to introduce our speaker for today. Professor Silvia Sonderegger is a professor of economics and member of the Center for Decision Research and Experimental Economics at the University of Nottingham. She's also the deputy director of the PhD program at the School of Economics. And in the past, she has been an assistant professor and reader of economics at the University of Bristol in the UK. Her research interests include game theoretic models of norms, information economics, theoretical models of parent-child interactions, endogenous preferences, theory of incentives, theory of contracts, and industrial economics. The today is called in the same way that the paper. You can find the link to the paper in the reminder email that we've been sending. And it's called "It's Not a Lie If You Believe the Norm Does Not Apply, Conditional Norm Following with Strategic Beliefs." We have, as mentioned, a co-author in the audience, Dr. Oygon Dimant, and the moderator for today will be Professor Enrique Fatas, who's a professor of economics at Loughborough University a distinguished fellow here at the University of Pennsylvania, and a core member of our center. So with that, I give the floor to Professor Silvia.
Thank you very much, Paulius, and thank you very much for having me. I'm really, really happy to be here today. So let me share the screen. Here we go. Okay, can you all see my screen, yeah? Okay, so this is joint work with Cristina Bicchieri and Eugen Demant, who is here and is going to be answering questions in the chat. And this paper is really a paper about self-serving belief distortions. Okay, and this is something, this is a field that has experienced recently a certain amount of momentum. Okay, so in the last 5 years or so, there has been a number of papers that have come out which document this notion that people may choose to entertain beliefs that somehow justify them behaving in a little bit of a self-serving manner, okay, behaving selfishly. And here we have a list of papers. What is interesting is that this research topic is becoming an important research topic, even in economics, where traditionally we model beliefs as something that is exogenous and over which you certainly have no scope for manipulation. But things are changing, and people are starting to take these ideas on board. And of course, these empirical papers are examples of what the literature calls motivated beliefs. So motivated in the sense that there is an element of choice, there is an element of motivation in believing something. And this literature is somehow follows the theories that have been presented by people like Benabou and Tirole, Brunner, Meyer, and Parker, and the pioneering contribution, early contribution by Akerlof and Dickens. They were really the first, at least in economics, to start talking about this notion that perhaps beliefs are something that you can influence, that you can affect yourself. Now, what we do in this paper, we investigate motivated beliefs in a context where there is uncertainty about the dominant norm. Okay, and this is the norm element of this research here. So what is the underlying idea? The underlying idea is the following. We're going to think about norms within the context of lying behavior. And of course, we know that lies are ubiquitous, right? We've all been in the position of perhaps telling a lie, or, you know, having to confront someone who has told a lie. And we know that people often lie for their own benefit. There is nothing new here. It is also the case often that in the real world, when it comes to lying, there is some uncertainty as to which norm applies specifically. Okay, in some cases, lies are innocuous. They're called white lies, and therefore they're considered permissible. On the other hand, at the other end of the spectrum, you see that some lies are clearly considered unacceptable. Okay, so we have a little bit of a continuum. And, you know, in between these two extremes, there is a large gray area, essentially, which is characterized by some degree of uncertainty about how acceptable or unacceptable a lie may be. And this is the space in which we want to operate in this paper. Okay? So our idea is really that when norms are ambiguous, people form beliefs about norms by, you know, trying to form analogy to their previous experiences, you know, using examples perhaps from culture, etc. But this process is far from being an exact science. This process is very often susceptible to self-serving manipulation. Okay? You may choose to give more or less relevance to a past experience when sort of forming your beliefs, depending exactly on some of the features that these beliefs may deliver for you. So what are the questions that we are really trying to address? So essentially, we want to understand how people form, how people distort, and how people change their beliefs about prevailing social norms. when these are not clearly defined. And more precisely, we want to understand, first of all, whether self-serving beliefs manipulation occurs within this context. And then if it does, we want to understand when and how. So we want to characterize exactly how individuals engage in self-serving belief distortion within this context that we are studying here. Okay. And then another question, of course, that we want to address is, I hope I will be able to talk about this, is whether we can use the evidence on belief manipulation to discriminate between competing theoretical accounts. Okay, so you can really look at where is it and when is it that people manipulate their beliefs about norms, for instance, in order to understand what are the important features that matter or not to individuals, and therefore distinguish or trying to find support in favor of some theories or some other ones. Okay? So really belief manipulation as a smoking gun, if you want, in this case. So in this talk, what I'm going to do, I'm going to start by describing the experimental design, and then I'm going to go to the conceptual framework, which is really based on the work by Christina and you know, the sort of the models by Benabou and Tirol and Brunner-Mare and Parker. And then I'm going to move on to the results and finally conclude. Are there any questions at this stage? Okay, so let me move on to the experimental design. And first, I will say a few words about data collection. So this is really an experiment that was conducted online. So the subjects are MTurk subjects. And here are a few stats about the body of participants. Everything is very, very much standard. And as you will see, we also had a sort of an add-on experiment, which we ran exposed in order to shed some further light on the mechanism at work here. So what is the experiment we are running? So this is a two-stage experiment where in the first stage, we have a belief elicitation stage where people are asked to express their beliefs on a certain question. And I'm going to give you exactly the questions that people are asked in a second. And in the second stage, people are going to play the dice task, okay, where they have to decide whether they want to report truthfully or not the number that comes up in a die toss. Okay. Oops. And this is essentially a binary version of the dice under the cup game by Fischbacher and Fermi-Hoysi. It is a binary version in the sense that there is only one winning number and all the other numbers yield a zero monetary payoff. And yes, as I said, people know that you know, there will be no checking on whether they report truthfully or not. So they can choose essentially what they want to do once they have tossed their die. Now, as far as the belief elicitation task is concerned, we consider two treatments. Okay? In one, we elicit the subject's empirical beliefs. In other words, the subject's beliefs about what the majority of individuals do in this dice task. Okay? The second is a normative beliefs treatment, and here the subject has to say what he or she thinks that the majority think is the right thing to do. Okay, so normative beliefs in this dice task. Okay, and the correct answers are going to be based on the results from a pre-experimental survey. So the subjects are informed that there is a right answer. Okay, so, and this is going to come from a study that has already been conducted. So let's look exactly at what the questions that people had to answer look like. In empirical treatments, people were given the following screenshot. Okay, so they were being told, please read the following statements and determine whether you believe them to be true or false. Which statement is true? In a similar study, most people lied for their own benefit. In a similar study, most people did not lie for their own benefit. So essentially, you had to choose which of these two mutually exclusive possibilities was the true one based on a survey that had been conducted before the experiment. We call this the empirical treatment because it really concerns what you think the majority of people did in the previous study. By contrast, the normative treatment concerns what people think it's all right. Okay, so here the subjects were told the following. Please read the following statement and determine it to be true or false. Which statement is true? In a similar study, most people said it is okay to lie for your own benefit. Or in a similar study, most people said it is not okay to lie for your own benefit. So this is normative because it concerns what people consider to be okay or not. Okay? Our subjects were either in the normative treatment or in the empirical treatment. Now, how does belief elicitation work? So as I said, we think of the belief elicitation stage as a stage where really subjects are confronted with this task, which presumably they've never seen before. And therefore, it's a kind of, unfamiliar environment for them. And they have to form beliefs about what most people will think is the right thing to do in this context, or what most people did in this context. They're going to do that by analogy with their personal experiences, okay, with introspection, perhaps, with books, movies that they've seen, and so on. Now, the key feature here is that this process, as I said, is a malleable process to some extent. Okay, you can sort of manipulate it a little bit. You can massage it a little bit. This is what we are really going to be focusing on. Okay, this notion that perhaps you may have incentives to massage this process and come out of this process of belief formation having certain beliefs, okay, that may be perhaps more convenient for you to hold. Okay. Yeah. Now, what we think here is the story. It's basically this notion that why would you want to change your beliefs, or why would you want to manipulate your beliefs? Well, presumably you're going to manipulate your beliefs if this is something that is going to facilitate what happens in the task stage. Okay, so we're going to think of an environment where essentially individuals are going to find it optimal to manipulate their beliefs in order to find it easier to lie subsequently. And the purpose of this is going to be one where you can advance your own material interests. So in that sense, we're going to focus on motivated beliefs. We think of the process of self-serving belief manipulation as one that is really motivated by material interests. Okay, and as I told you, there is a theoretical literature from which we borrow, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. And essentially, this literature is game theoretic, looks at game theoretic models in which the individual sort of plays a game with him or herself. Okay, and you try to convince yourself essentially that something is true in order to find it easier to adopt certain behaviors. And of course, belief manipulation, may involve a cost. So we remain relatively agnostic here. In fact, in our theory, it is enough that this costs. Actually, it could even hold if the cost is zero or if the cost is very, very small. Okay, so we don't need this cost to be particularly large. Okay, now we said that the reason why you may want to manipulate your beliefs is that you want to change your behavior in the DICE task. And in order really to zoom in on this idea, we are going to consider two conditions. The first, we call it cheating possibility known condition, CPK, is one where at equals 0, so when your beliefs are being elicited, you're also informed that not only you should say what you think is true about the behavior of people or what people think it's okay in this task, but you're also shortly going to play this task yourself. Okay, so you're informed that, immediately after having given your beliefs, you're going to be engaged in the task. And we think that this is a situation where indeed this possibility of manipulating your beliefs strategically may come into play, because if you know that you're going to shortly play the task, and you know that when you play the task, actually, if you lie, that may be potentially advantageous for you in monetary terms, then perhaps you want to sort of convince yourself at the belief formation stage that it is kind of okay to lie, because this is a convenient belief to hold later on. And then the second possibility is, the second treatment is the cheating possibility unknown, CPU. In this treatment, people are not informed that they will shortly be playing the dice task themselves. And essentially, this is a treatment where, because you are unaware of what is shortly going to happen, it is not clear that you should have any kind of incentive to manipulate your beliefs at the belief elicitation stage. Okay, these beliefs are incentivized, so you know that you are going to be paid something. You're going to receive a monetary payment if what you say corresponds to the truth, to what really happened in a previous survey, and therefore, presumably you're going to try to give the beliefs that correspond to what you think is most likely to have happened. And of course, given that in this case, you are going to give your beliefs, if you want, in an unbiased manner, because you don't have an incentive to sort of massage this belief formation process, it may be the case that once you form these beliefs and you are eventually confronted with the dice task, then these beliefs that you formed previously now are there, and therefore they may end up inhibiting lying or affecting your behavior once the dice task arrives. Okay. We run these two treatments, of course, because by looking at the difference in elicited beliefs between CPK and CPU, we can find evidence of belief manipulation. Okay, if we notice that there is a difference when people are aware that they will shortly play the dice task themselves in terms of the beliefs that they declare to have, as opposed to when they are not aware, then we take this as an indication that there has been some belief manipulation at play. And this is just a map that gives you the various treatments that we are running. So empirical, normative, CPK, CPU, so aware of the lying opportunity ahead or not. Okay, so if there are no questions, I'm going to move now to the conceptual framework. This is really a very simple theoretical framework that is based on existing models, which are essentially game theoretic models, which allow for belief manipulation, which allow for people to strategically massage their own beliefs. Okay? And the setup that I want to introduce here is one in which there are really three types of individuals. And these are as follows. So first we have unconditionally honest people. Unconditionally honest people always tell the truth. So they don't really condition their behavior on anything. They are just honest all the time. And they always tell the truth. They may or may not think lying is okay. So we are agnostic about what they may think is appropriate or not in a given setup. And then we have Unconditional liars. So these are also unconditional, but they always lie. They always lie whenever this is profitable for them. So they are people who really have very little scruples in a given environment, of course. Again, they may or may not think that lying is okay. Now, these are sort of boring types because they're passive. They always behave in the same way. They don't play much of an active role in our theory, but nonetheless, they're important. And I will show you in a second why they are. Okay, so here, just summarizing, they are passive types. Their behavior does not depend on their beliefs about what others do and what others deem appropriate. They always lie or they never lie. Now, the key feature here is that these passive agents are majoritarian, but the exact shares of unconditional honest and unconditional liars are unknown. What does that imply? That implies that we are looking at a setup that is characterized by norm uncertainty. Okay, we don't know exactly whether a norm for honesty applies and is followed in this setup or not. Okay, why do we not know that? Because we don't know whether in a given context the unconditionally honest or the unconditional liars are majoritarian. Okay. Now, here we have assumed that passive agents are always the majority. This is a little bit of a technical assumption, which allows us to sidestep issues that are connected with multiplicity of equilibria. To some extent, you can also think of these agents as really capturing the agent that played the game which your belief elicitation task is based on. Okay, as far as you're concerned, those players from a previous game are essentially exogenous. And you don't know whether the majority of them ended up lying or whether the majority of them ended up not lying. And you don't know whether the majority approved or did not approve of lying. So you're essentially faced with norm uncertainty. What does this imply? So this implies that as far as you're concerned, there may be 4 possible states of the world. It could be that the majority tells the truth and thinks lying is okay. Could also be that the majority tells the truth and thinks lying is not okay. And vice versa, it could be that the majority lies and thinks lying is okay, or that the majority lies and thinks lying is not okay. So these are the 4 possible states that may arise, and they are all possible in principle, but of course, they are not all equally likely. Some of them are going to be presumably much more likely than others. Okay? If we use introspection, we see that it seems more likely that if the majority tells the truth, then they probably also think that lying is not okay, as opposed to thinking that it is okay, and vice versa, perhaps. So we see that out of these possible states, there are going to be some that are objectively more likely, some that are objectively less likely. We don't take a stance on exactly which are more likely or less likely at this stage. But what we do is assuming that the agents, the subjects in our game, know what are the objective probabilities with which each state of the world applies. So you know that some situations are more likely to arise than others, but of course you don't know exactly what applies to this specific environment that we're in right now. And of course, out of these 4 possible states of the world, there is one which is different from the others. And this is the state in which the majority tells the truth and the majority thinks lying is not okay. Why is this state of the world different from the other? Because this state of the world corresponds to a situation where an honesty norm applies. Okay, and here we are really borrowing from Christina's work on norms, where essentially, in order for a norm to exist and be followed, we need 2 conditions. Okay, we need an empirical condition to be satisfied. So the majority needs to behave in a certain way, in this case, telling the truth, not lie. And second, we need also a normative condition to be satisfied. The majority should approve or disapprove of a certain behavior. And here, this corresponds to disapproving of lying. Okay, so in this case, the norm for honesty applies. In all the other cases, it does not. So really, this uncertainty about the states of the world translates very naturally into an uncertainty about which norm applies here, because depending on what state of the world we have, we know that a norm for honesty will apply or not. Why do we care about this? Why do we care about the fact that a norm for honesty may apply or not? Because we have a third type of agents, a third type of subjects here, namely conditional liars. And these are the interesting ones. These are the ones that we're going to focus on. These conditional liar subjects incur a positive lying cost, but only if they know or if they believe that a norm for honesty applies in a setup. Okay, so if they think that in a given environment, a norm for honesty exists and is followed, then they really dislike lying in this environment. They suffer a psychological cost if they lie. If, on the other hand, they believe that the norm for honesty does not apply to a certain context, then these conditional liars will not suffer any psychological cost from lying. They will feel very comfortable lying. So these are really the guys that are the target of our experiment, if you want, because they are the subjects who may potentially benefit from convincing themselves that a norm for honesty does not apply in a certain context. Because if they convince themselves that the norm for honesty does not apply, they are going to be able to lie with a clear conscience, if you want. They are going to be able to lie in the dice task without feeling any psychological discomfort whatsoever. Okay. Now, a few words going a little bit deeper into this mechanism of belief manipulation. So why should conditional liars manipulate beliefs? I've just sketched the reason, but there are a number of assumptions built into the argument I just gave you. And here I just want to sort of flesh them out, okay? So tell you explicitly what these underlying assumptions are. So we're going to think, for instance, of the treatment in which people are encouraged to give their empirical beliefs, but the same applies, of course, to the normative beliefs treatment. And we said we have two stages, one that is a belief elicitation stage. And in this belief elicitation stage, you're going to be asked to state your empirical beliefs, which is going to prompt you to form this belief, right? You have never thought about this task before in your life. Now you're asked to say what you think happens in this task. So you're going to form your empirical beliefs. But then, of course, you know, it is not only your empirical beliefs that are going to determine whether you believe a norm for honesty exists or not. Your beliefs about the existence or not of an honesty norm, as we said, they are going to depend on two things, empirical beliefs and normative beliefs. So these two things together, we have two conditions that must hold in order for an honesty norm to arise. So why should you manipulate your empirical beliefs? After all, you also have some scope for maneuver as far as the normative beliefs are concerned, right? Yes, but what we impose here, and this is very much in line with the theoretical literature on belief manipulation, we're going to impose a consistency requirement, which essentially says the following: your normative beliefs, once you have formed some empirical beliefs, cannot be whatever you want them to be. They need to be consistent with the empirical beliefs, where consistency essentially captures a notion of Bayesian updating. Okay, they need to follow from your empirical beliefs through a process of Bayesian updating. what does that imply? That implies, for instance, that if we think about these 4 possible states of the world here, okay, suppose that you have formed your belief, and your belief is that the majority tells the truth. So you're going to be really in the domain of having to choose between the first and the second state of the world. Okay, so your empirical beliefs are set because they were formed when you had to answer the belief elicitation task. Now you have your normative beliefs that you can still form in order to decide whether you think there is a norm for honesty or not. But these normative beliefs, they need to be somewhat consistent with your empirical beliefs. So if it is objectively much more likely that if the majority tells the truth, they also think that lying is not okay. Okay, so if in 90% of the cases where the majority tells the truth within a given context, they also think that lying is not okay, then you cannot start believing all of a sudden that it is extremely likely that in spite of the majority telling the truth, it's extremely likely that they think lying is okay. You cannot do that because this would be contradictory. This would be a situation in which you are not forming beliefs that are consistent, okay, with one another. So if it is objectively true that whenever the majority tells the truth, with 90% probability, they also think that lying is not okay, then upon convincing yourself here at the empirical belief elicitation stage that the majority tells the truth, you need also to acknowledge, when you are trying to decide which norm applies, you need also to acknowledge that then it is also very likely that a norm for honesty applies, because whenever the majority tells the truth, they also very likely to disapprove of lying. Okay? So this is an important consistency requirement, which is very much in line with recent evidence on belief stickiness, for instance. And here we have a few examples of empirical papers which observe exactly that. Okay, they observe that whenever you start forming some beliefs, then you cannot all of a sudden turn them upside down. Okay, once you have formed these empirical beliefs here, you cannot all of a sudden at the dice task stage turn your beliefs upside down and start believing something completely in contradiction with the beliefs you formed at the belief elicitation stage. Okay? And as I said, this is also very much in line with the theoretical approaches on belief manipulation. It essentially ensures that there is some kind of discipline, because if we didn't have any type of requirements along these lines, then essentially the fact that people can manipulate their beliefs would not matter, because well, I can manipulate my beliefs at t equals 0, but then let's say if I can manipulate them again from scratch at t equal 1, why should it matter? Okay, that I elicited some beliefs previously or not. Okay, maybe whenever I'm confronted with different environments, I start adopting different beliefs that are in contradiction with one another, depending on what environment I'm on. Okay, if this is the case, then it is very difficult to make predictions about what will happen, because essentially people switch from one belief to another, as things happen to them. But what we want to have here is instead a little bit of discipline. Okay, there is a consequence of forming some beliefs at t equals 0, which is that at t equal 1, this is going to restrict the scope of maneuver you have in order when you want to form beliefs about what is the relevant norm, whether there is a norm for truth telling or not in this environment. And I think I need to hurry a little bit because I'm a little bit late on my schedule. Okay, so let's go a little bit further into what we think then will take place in this experiment. Okay? And here, this is really common sense. The first observation that we may present here is the following. So at t equals 0, belief manipulation may occur, first of all, only if conditional subjects are aware of the lying opportunity ahead, because if they are not, obviously they have no incentive to manipulate their beliefs. And second, if manipulation is instrumental to get them to lie at t=1. Okay? Remember, we're following the tradition in economics. We're saying, look, people manipulate their beliefs only to the extent to which this gives them a material advantage. Okay? Therefore, our theory here predicts that unless you receive a material advantage, which here needs to take the form of facilitating your lying and the lie task, you are not going to manipulate your beliefs, because there is no reason why you should. Okay? And in order for belief manipulation to be instrumental to get you to lie in the lie task, of course, it has to be the case that if beliefs are not distorted, then you would not lie. Okay? Because if you lie no matter what, then of course you have no incentive to manipulate your beliefs. So it has to be that you are in a situation where your undiluted beliefs, if you want, would induce you to tell the truth. Okay, and yes, so if subjects already lie, then belief manipulation is of course not necessary. And here we have a number of predictions. So of course, lying should, in the CPK, should weakly exceed lying in the CPU, of course. If belief manipulation occurs, it should strictly exceed lying in the CPU. Then we have a couple of predictions which are really common sense, which are that in the empirical treatment, if belief distortion occurs, it should take the form of convincing yourself that the majority lie, okay, because of course, if the majority does not lie, then it's possible that the norm for truth-telling applies, and therefore you're going to be inhibited in your lying. And vice versa, in a normative treatment, if there is belief distortion, you should take the form of convincing yourself that the majority considers lying to be acceptable. Okay? And this sounds almost common sense, but in the paper we have a section where we show that alternative theories of belief manipulation would not hold these predictions. So this is quite interesting. Yes, and then we have essentially a few words about the an additional experiment that we ran, which essentially shows that if people believe, or if people are told that the majority of individuals tell the truth in a given context, they also think that it is very, very likely that they will disapprove of lying. Well, if people are told that in a given context, the majority of people disapprove of lying, these people don't see this as being very, very indicative of what people will do. Okay, so I'm going a bit quickly here. I'm sorry about that. But essentially, this is what, this is an additional prediction that we have, which is that indeed, assuming that the true state is one where the honesty norm applies, the incentives to distort beliefs are going to be greater in the empirical treatment. And this is because people think that if the majority tells the truth, then they will also think that lying is not okay. And we sort of corroborate this with an addon experiment where we gave subjects, in one case, information saying that in a previous experiment, the majority did not lie. And we asked them how many they thought disapproved of lying. And we get a 77.5% saying, well, probably the majority also disapproves of lying. Well, if subjects are told that in a previous experiment, the majority did not approve of lying, we see that people think that there is a 50% probability approximately that people lied nonetheless. Okay. Here it's just, okay, so I'm going to go super quickly here. I don't have time. I think I need to move to the results. And here are our results. So essentially, here we have the empirical treatment. Here we have a normative treatment. And in black, we have CPK. And in blue, we have CPU. So what we find is that in the empirical treatment, there is clear evidence of belief distortion. People felt the need to convince themselves that the majority of individuals in a previous experiment lied. And the reason why they did that, okay, in this panel we see behavior, is that this allowed them to lie more. Okay, we see that in the CPU treatment, where people could not manipulate their beliefs, and therefore we have less people reporting that they believe that the majority lie, there is much less lying than the CPK treatment, where you can manipulate your beliefs. So this is evidence that belief manipulation is really instrumental. It translates into more lying. In the normative treatment, on the other hand, what we find is that there is no belief manipulation. Beliefs are essentially the same, okay, in CPK and CPU. And this translates into behavior being essentially the same in both treatments. And interestingly, this behavior is the same as behavior in the empirical treatment when people manipulate their beliefs. What does this tell us? This tells us that in the normative condition, subjects felt perfectly comfortable lying in spite of acknowledging that they thought that the majority of individuals disapproved of lying. So they didn't feel the need to distort their beliefs in order to be able to lie in the dice task. They were lying and at the same time declaring that they thought people think lying is not okay. So, and the intuition for this is very much what I just showed you, that even if you think that the majority of individuals says that lying is not okay, this does not imply at all that a norm for honesty applies, because it is still very likely that people lie nonetheless. Okay, so saying that lying is not okay is not in contradiction with lying. Often people do both, and therefore you don't feel the need to manipulate beliefs in this respect, because actually a norm for lying may not apply even if the majority of individuals say lying is not okay. On the other hand, here, if the majority of individuals does not lie, then this is very, very, very indicative that a norm for honesty applies in this setting. And I think I really have to conclude. So yeah, here we have a regression analysis, which corroborates our finding. Alternative theoretical mechanisms to explain our findings. I don't have time to go into that. I will refer you to the paper if you're interested in this. And here, essentially, our conclusions. So unlike much of the existing research, we really study belief distortion in a novel context, which is a context in which norms are uncertain. And the object of belief distortion here is what norm applies. Okay, and we have these very rich findings that depend on whether we are talking about the normative domain or the empirical domain. And we really show that this is consistent with the theory in which we have conditional norm followers who behave in a certain way only if they think this is consistent with the dominant norm. And we show that these conditional norm followers may have an incentive to distort their beliefs in order to have some monetary gains later on. And yeah, we explore some policy implications of that. And yeah, we think this is a very, very interesting, area of research more generally. And hopefully we would like to work further and explore further these very rich mechanisms. I'm going to stop here.
So thank you, Silvia. Sorry, I didn't interrupt you because the Eugen was doing a great job dealing with the questions.
Okay.
I prefer to give you a little bit more of time.
Thank
because,
you.
I know how long the paper is.
I know.
And we don't have much time.
There is so much to say. Yeah.
But now we have time for questions from the audience. So either in the chat or maybe raising your hand. We have time certainly for some questions. I do have a comment, Silvia, and it is about the consequences. I believe the paper. I mean, it's not the first time I attend the presentation of this paper, and I love it. But maybe you could elaborate a little bit more on the last part of when you were in the conclusions, when you said some policy lessons I'm a little bit concerned about the policy lessons saying, well, we just need to send very clear signals, very clear information. I don't know if you could elaborate a little bit more about how the paper is actually informing or could inform a little bit more specifically, like some policy rules to follow, just to prevent people from just forming the beliefs they want and then acting accordingly.
Yes, so one of the things that comes out quite strongly from the paper is that once you form these beliefs in the belief formation stage, then they stick around. You can no longer manipulate. So one of the lessons I think that come out here is that we should pay attention to this belief formation stage, and we should make sure that we inject the right beliefs pretty early on in people. So this really focuses on setting the stage at the beginning, perhaps, with young people, with children in schools, because these beliefs are going to stick around. And once beliefs have been formed, it is difficult to influence them ex post. So this is one lesson that I think it's a very interesting one. And of course, it's got to do also with norm nudging, so that the process of trying to get people, to understand that there may or may not be some norms in certain respects. And again, these beliefs, so setting the right stage, I think is super important. And yes, another lesson is, of course, this differential weight of empirical versus normative features. And this comes out really strongly. And I think it's really this notion that, what you do, it's a strong signal of what you also think, but saying, I think this is wrong, is not perceived as a very strong signal for obvious reasons, because actually, talk is cheap, right? And therefore, people acknowledge that and they don't feel the need. So this is not something that prevents them. If they think, okay, the majority of people said that they don't think this is okay, I still do it because actually I think they probably say so, but they actually do this anyway. So.
Okay, excellent. Actually, your answer takes me to one paper I recently published with Christina. But we have Alexandros here with a question. Go ahead, Alexandros.
Hi. Thanks a lot thanks for the nice presentation. So about the policy implications that you just mentioned. So you say that we need to inform kids about norms and put these beliefs early on. But you also show that the beliefs that matter are the ones about what people actually do, not what people think. So okay, let's think about paying taxes. I live in Sweden. I come from Greece, right? Telling people in Sweden that people do pay taxes is correct.
I know, yes.
Telling people in Greece that people do pay taxes, that's a lost cause, right? I mean, how can you do this without lying yourself?
I agree, and this is a challenge. And of course, this is, I think, what this paper shows is that this is one of the big challenges whenever you want to use norms for influencing people's behavior, because of course, in some cases, the information you give goes in the right direction, but in some cases it does not. And then what should you do? And I think this is a really interesting area for further research. So we don't tackle this in this paper, of course, but it's a very interesting question, right? So once you have the wrong behavior that is established, what do you do to shift things around? It's really tough because there is a lot of inertia. And in these beliefs, this process of beliefs affecting how you behave then yourself is what generates this inertia, right? In the past, people always cheated on taxes. I also do it because I think that's the norm. Then the next generation will also do it because they think it's the norm, which is true because I've done. So it's, you're stuck in a bad equilibrium. But let's hope there is some hope, right?
Yeah. So Silvia, well, is there any other question? Because I have another comment. Any other question from the audience right now? Okay, then I will jump in. I cannot help it. So something I like about the paper is that in the paper, what you do, and you didn't have much time in the presentation to explain this, you actually look at alternative explanations, and actually you discard alternative explanations.
Yeah,
so could you please elaborate a little bit on this and maybe explain, if you want to go back and use some slide or just without the slides, and tell us a little bit more about how you do that?
Yes. So yes, thank you very much for this question. So actually, we think that the data that we have here allow us to discriminate between a number of potential explanations. And for instance, one of these explanations is moral licensing, or if you want, the notion which is presented, for instance, by Rabin and others, that you really feel a discomfort in adopting a certain behavior if you think that the majority of people disapprove of that. Okay, and I think this is certainly something that our data seem not to support, because we actually have people in the normative treatment, they seem perfectly comfortable. So at least as far as this context is concerned, we do not get support for this moral, for the fact that the moral beliefs of others are really what matters as far as how comfortable or uncomfortable you feel adopting certain behavior. So this is certainly one thing that we find. Another interesting finding has to do with models of image, and this is connected with the literature on lying. And there are some papers that say that really what motivates you to lie or not, or what motivates you not to lie often, is the fear to be perceived as someone who does not tell the truth. Okay, so they fear that people may think that you are a liar yourself. Okay, and we show in the paper that actually within this context, the implications for our setup would be quite different, because they would. If this is the story, or if this is all the story, then in our setup, people should manipulate their beliefs in the direction that says, well, the majority of people does not lie, rather than convincing themselves that the majority of people lie. Why? Because if it is true that the majority of people does not lie, somebody who sees me saying, I've got a 5 and therefore you should pay me, they're going to update their beliefs. They know that 90% of people who say they've got a 5, they're not lying, because we are in an environment where there is a lot of honesty, and therefore they're going to think probably you're not lying. Probably you are one of those 90%. So if I want to feel comfortable, I need to convince myself that lying does not carry a bad image. When does lying does not carry a bad image? When the majority of people does not lie, which is exactly the opposite of what we find. People feel better when they lie and they think everybody else is doing it. So these are two interesting, but there is more. So in the paper which we discussed, but these are two interesting aspects, if you want, that come out of the data, which I like very much. Yes.
So excellent. So maybe we have time for one last short question, yes, if any.
Or if Eugen wants to summarize, perhaps something that people ask in the chat. Yes.
So Eugen, do you want to choose maybe some of the questions that you addressed in the chat?
Yeah, was there an element that people thought, that people reacted to, especially?
Yeah, no, nothing particular. I mean, Heidi has had this question since in the CPU treatment, since we don't explicitly tell people that they don't play the game, we just leave it vague. How many of participants in that treatment could have thought, nevertheless, that they might have played the game? And so my answer was essentially, one of the challenges with saying that is we had to have them play the game. So we couldn't tell them that they don't play the game because we needed their behavior. So there are people for sure, but that will be randomized across treatments. So
exactly. So there is no reason why it should be different in the normative and the empirical treatment, for instance. So that alone cannot be the reason why we find her. Yes.
Okay, so I believe we are almost over time. So unless there is one last question, I believe we are going to leave it here. I don't see any hand raised. Okay, let's leave it here. Silvia, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Great talk.
A pleasure.
It's been really interesting. I'm sure the paper is going to get well published soon. So we'll hear news.
Brilliant.
Yeah, very fast. Excellent.
And also thanks to Eugenio, of course, as Eugen is pointing out. Yes.
Yeah, Eugen did a great job here. And also thank you for the very nice. Yeah, Eugenio did a great talk, started this session with a great talk. And thank you, everybody, for attending this talk and for your interesting questions. You have, you know who is coming in 2 weeks, so we hope that you will be able to make it 2 weeks from now. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye.